When you're analyzing real estate properties, there are basically two types of analyses that you do: project analysis and investment analysis. On the project analysis side, that's where you really dig down into the property itself and start determining what it's worth and whether you want to buy it. You know, that's where you do all your due diligence and get your due diligence checklists out, of which we've got some on our website. But you get into that and you start figuring out, is this something I really want to invest in? A cap rate is what is applied to the income of a property to determine its value. And it is a simple ratio that takes the net operating income of a property before there's any debt, divide the value into the income. It's like an interest rate. Whatever that number is, which is a percentage, that's your cap rate. And when you work with a lot of appraisers and commercial brokers and others, and you get familiar with the industry, you begin to get a sense of what the cap rates are for the different property types you're talking. Residential real estate, for instance, has one of the lowest cap rates. And so when you're figuring value, if you take the income, divide it by the rate to get the value, the lower this number is, the rate, the higher the value. So on residential real estate, that's a low number, which gives you a high value, okay? But it also is indicative of the types of returns that you can get. You know, so a Walgreens, for instance, has a cap rate of about 5. Apartments have a cap rate of about 6, in that range. Family dollar stores, Dollar General, Dollar Tree, those types of triple and double net lease properties usually have a cap rate of around 7. Then you start getting into more risky type properties. A hotel, you can have a cap rate of 8, 9, or 10. A lot of times people will just throw out an 8 cap as their go-to rule of thumb rate to kind of get a sense of where they are. But so it's the net operating income divided by the cap rate equals the fair market value of the property. And so you can go through and compare a lot of different properties on cap rates, and it gives you some sense of whether or not the property you're looking at is something that you want to invest in. But cap rates are nothing more than a rule of thumb. Everybody talks about those like they're the gospel, the end-all be-all of real estate, and they're a rule of thumb. A little teeny change in the cap rate can make a huge swing in value. So you got to be really careful when people are talking cap rates that you don't get enamored with the rate and think, oh, this is a great investment because it's got an 8 cap, and another investment has a 6 cap, and you're saying this is 2% better than the other one. Well, it's not. You have to, there's a lot of factors that go into risk that determine whether or not that's a good investment or a bad investment, okay? So investment analysis, on the other hand, this is kind of the more sophisticated side of the ledger. It determines how the property will perform in the future based on how it's performed in the past, depending on improvements and the improvements that you want to make on it. So there are basically 7 steps that I've identified in how to determine, to go through an investment analysis. We're going to look at just briefly past performance, then set up a cash flow model. Then we're going to calculate the sale price, the adjusted basis, the capital gain or loss on sale, net sale proceeds. And at the end of the day, if everything works perfectly, we'll get an internal rate of return. So, and then you can take an internal rate of return and compare it from one property type to another property type and have some level of assurance that you're comparing apples to apples, even though there may be different types of properties. So, So review past performance of the property. This is so critical because is anybody in here a real estate broker or agent? Okay, I'm going to say this, but no offense to either one of you. Sometimes when a property is listed for sale, it doesn't maybe have all of the right numbers it should have. Sometimes they run it through a real estate agent because the owner of the property doesn't want to tell the truth. And so between him and the real estate agent, they figure out a way to, with some level of sophistication and integrity, to fudge the numbers. So it looks better than it really does. So it's your job, if you're buying a property, any property, to really drill down and get the true numbers. And you can get them. It takes some work. But if you don't, you just got garbage in, and that's going to give garbage out. So this is a form that appears to be really complicated, and in order to set up any investment analysis model, you gotta have some decent, you gotta have the information in first before you start inputting everything. And that's all this is. It gives you, and it shows you down there at the bottom some of the assumptions that you're going to be making on the growth of the income, growth of the expenses year over year, what your estimated vacancy rates are going to be, what your appreciation is going to be, and your end cap rate that you think you're going to get. So this one that we're doing is just an apartment deal, okay? And so if you were to get on our NARIA website and start your investment analysis, it's going to require you to put a lot of this information in to get going. So the next step is to set up the cash flow model, and that's used to determine the net operating income, which is going to give you value and help you with your net cash flow and all of that jazz. So the net operating income is basically the actual or anticipated income minus your vacancy rate, things like that, and minus your operating expenses. And once you get to operating expenses, that's where you end. Why wouldn't you include debt service in that? Why wouldn't you include your mortgage payment in the calculation of NOI? Any idea?
You can't compare one property to another based on debt.
You can't compare one property to another based on debt because every borrower is different and every loan is different. So the number that you use is NOI, and initially, and then when you get to net cash flow, you're plugging in your own debt service, okay? Do you see where the net cash flow is down toward the bottom of the form? And it shows $118,006 in the first year, and then that grows every year, right? Well, nobody else does this, but being an accountant, I did a little trick to get me from net cash flow to net income, which is the reportable amount that you have on your tax return. Okay, and they're not the same, and the reason they're not the same is because you can deduct your mortgage payment from your taxes, and you know they've got a limitation on residential property, but on commercial property, of which this is one, there's no limitation on the amount of mortgage you can deduct on your property. So I put the mortgage payment in here that we estimate and subtract out the principal, or I add the principal back in because you can subtract the mortgage payment but not the principal. But yet you're paying principal, and that has an impact on your net cash flow. So if you do this little adjustment down at the bottom where you add back the principal payments on your note and you add and subtract the depreciation, you get to net income. So the cool thing, this illustration is showing you that even though you just put in your pocket $118,000, you're going to report to Uncle Sam a $63,695 loss. That is not a bad thing.
The wonder of real estate.
That is the wonder of real estate. So so I put that on the form, didn't put it on this illustration, yes.
For commercial properties, is it still 27 and a half years that you depreciate over?
On apartments, you can do a straight line depreciation over 27 and a half years. On commercial properties, any other type of commercial property, it's 39 years. So it's longer for other types of commercial property than apartments. They get a shorter depreciation schedule because there's a tax policy that says we want to benefit housing. So that's one of the
You can
reasons.
cost segregate things and
Yeah.
depreciate much faster.
What is your opinion?
So
on
we've
cost
got
segregation?
a dentist, you're a dentist, right? We've got a dentist that's also a real estate agent, and he's talking about cost segregation, which is a pretty complicated accounting concept, but basically what it is in real estate you can only depreciate on straight line. But that doesn't mean you can't break out the IRS lets you break your property into component parts. A roof doesn't last 27 and a half years. The landscaping may or may not. The asphalt, the heating and air conditioning system, the carpet, they all have different useful lives. And the IRS has set up a table with all those useful lives. And you can do, especially if it's new construction, it's easier than old construction. You can do what's called cost segregation, where you break the building into its component parts, and the basic structure you depreciate over 27 and a half years, and everything else gets a shorter life. So you basically front-end load your depreciation schedule because everything has a shorter life than 27 and a half years. You know, roof may be 20, carpet may be 5. There's a whole schedule on that. But then you're getting higher depreciation. Now in this example, we didn't do cost segregation, we just did straight line. But you could significantly increase that net income loss the first year and still make a profit by using cost segregation. So, yeah, good question. Step 3, calculate the sale price for the property at disposition. That's simply taking your 5th-year NOI, dividing it by the cap rate that you set, and that establishes a value. So there's your net operating income in year 5. There's your cap rate, and there's your value. So you need that in order to estimate 5 years out what you think your return is going to be. And if you don't have an estimated sale price at some point in time, you cannot calculate a return on your investment. So you need to have a sale price out there at some point in time in order to estimate that, okay? So the 4th step is calculate the adjusted basis. Now we're getting into some tax stuff, but it's important to have these ideas if you're really gonna do an investment analysis. So you take the original price that you bought the property for, and you add to that any improvements that you made on it. You subtract the depreciation that you've taken over that period of time, and that becomes what's called your adjusted basis. So then the next step is to calculate the gain or loss on the sale. And you have to have this adjusted basis calculation in order to get that. So you take the estimated sale price, and we said $12,074,000 was what our value is, so we said, okay, it's going to be worth $12,050,000, say, 5 years down the road. And then you plug in a number for the cost of sales. I think we put in 3 or 4%, something like that. Because you got a real estate commission you're going to pay, and usually on these bigger deals you're not paying 6%. You're paying something less than that. But then you subtract your adjusted basis, and that gives you your overall gain on the property. But that gain is based on 2 components. it's based on gain that's attributable to the depreciation because you deducted all your depreciation from your adjusted basis. So you have to figure out how much of that gain really relates to that. And then you have to subtract what's called suspended losses. Have you heard of those? Any idea what a suspended loss is? So a suspended loss is, say every year you have more net income losses or net losses that you're showing on your books than you can use. All of those losses don't go away. They just become suspended and indefinitely. And when you sell the asset, you get to deduct those.
Can also refer to as carry forward losses, correct?
Yes, yeah. They can be referred to as carry forward losses, yeah. And then once you've done that, then what you have left is the gain that's attributable to the appreciation in the value of the asset. Okay? And you pay a different tax rate on the gain attributable to depreciation and the gain attributable to appreciation. Okay? So now we're going to calculate the net sale proceeds because we've got a mortgage on this property, right? So we had a sale price less the cost of sale. We subtract our mortgage. If we've got reserve balances, sometimes you have reserves, then you'd add those back in. And that gives you the sale proceeds before tax. And in some investment models, you figure the sales tax before tax and then you calculate your IRR off of that number. We didn't used to do that. I used to go deduct everything, all the taxes, and get down to that number, and then that's what I would represent. But I found in the world we're in, everybody's quoting from the sales proceeds before tax, and they let every individual investor figure out what their own tax base is. But for purposes of this illustration, I want to show you how this works. So the government, I said this last time, the IRS giveth and the IRS taketh away, right? Well, they gave you a tax deduction for depreciation the whole time you owned the property. Now when you sell it, they say, and this didn't used to be the case, but it is now, okay, you're going to pay us back for that. So you have to recapture every bit of depreciation that you've taken, and they charge you a 25% tax on that. Period. End of story. Yes.
Is that just on the difference between how far it like depreciated and like the sale price?
No.
They
Has
take
nothing-
all of that deduction
All the
back.
depreciation that you've taken. If you front end loaded it, you have more depreciation. When you're selling, you're going to pay 25% on it. Some have said, well, okay, I just won't take any depreciation, period. And if you try that little game, the IRS will come in and impute an estimated amount of depreciation and make you take 25% on that, pay 25% on that.
So that's equivalent to 25% of the total amount that you depreciated.
Just the gain that's attributable to the depreciation, not the total gain.
So in this case, you took 16 or $1.6 million worth of depreciation.
Yes.
But they're only recapturing the 400,000.
Yeah.
And you're then paying your tax rate on that 400,000.
No.
You're paying 400,000.
On this entire project, that's the cash that is paid back to the IRS for the depreciation that you've taken. If you're an investor and you own a percent of this deal, you get a percent of that. But usually all of this gets paid before you get your cash back. So, and then there's gain on a tax on the gain, and that's usually at 15%, unless you're a pretty high income earner earning And I put, on the back side of this gain on sale form, down at the bottom, I put the income tax rate. So if you're making over $434,550 a year, your gain's going to go up to 20%. But up to that amount of earned income, you're paying 15. So we put 15 in here. And so then you have what's called net sale proceeds. That's the cash that you get to put in your pocket before you pay your personal income taxes. Or President Obama's surcharge tax of 3.8% that's still in there. So, so now, that's what the form looks like on our website. And as you input all of the basic information, it basically populates the form for you as you go through. You don't have to do all the calculations manually. So, in a real estate investment, the IRR is the return each dollar earns while it is in the investment. Another way to think of it is the discount rate or the yield. To have a return, the dollars received must exceed the dollars you put in the investment, obviously. If you get back less than you put in, you don't have a positive return, right? The rate of return depends on both the amount received and the timing of when the amounts are received. And so the last step is how do you calculate the internal rate of return, which is the yield rate that's earned for the given investment over the holding period. And it applies to all the benefits, including the net proceeds at disposition, and those are all used to measure the return on the capital invested before or after taxes. So how do you calculate an IRR? You basically have three ways. And then every time I pull out my HP 10B2, my CPA son just laughs at me and thinks I don't know what I'm doing. But he doesn't understand I can calculate it faster than he can using Excel. So, but you can do it through an Excel spreadsheet. They have an IRR formula that's built into their model that you can use. And it's pretty simple. Or you can calculate it with an HP 10B2. And if you buy one of those, it's $35 at...
The app is cheaper.
The app is cheaper. I have the app on my phone and it's like $5. So it's pretty cheap. And or you can go to our website and we've got the model set up so that it just spits it out after you inputted all your information. So either one of those. And the way you set it up is, I call it a time value of money grid or a cash flow grid. You can calculate it and call it anything like that, but it's a grid that you set up which shows money in and money out. So the initial equity investment is always shown as a negative number because it's an outflow. Then you have your annual cash flows, which should coincide to what we put on our sheet. And then at the end of the day, you have the cash that you receive from the sale of the property. And you add that all up, and it will spit out your IRR. 17.97% after tax. Is that a good deal or a bad deal?
It's a great deal.
You'd feel good about that investment, wouldn't you? So, how do you feel about it? You got questions?
I feel good. One question I have with the depreciation, with the depreciation recapture, is that something that applies just to commercial properties? Or does that apply to residential investments?
Everything.
So like if I have
Every
a
real
fourplex,
estate
that's-
investment, that applies to your fourplex.
Okay.
Yep.
You still got to depreciate the 1.2.
Yeah.
So it's not like It's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So
So,
just recently, they've taken back 25%.
yeah.
Yeah.
So based on the time value of money, I mean, you're paying less taxes over the holding period than you would otherwise pay. And then you have to recapture a certain amount of that when you sell the asset, but you could keep that asset until the adjusted basis is practically nothing, right? It's never gonna go to zero because,
They never pay it.
They've given that 25% back to us in other tax breaks this year, so the 25% that they added that wasn't there before, they've given it back to us.
yeah.
If you 1031, does that tax go away?
It's deferred, it never goes away.
Okay, it's just, but during a 1031, it's deferred.
1031, you recognize no gain.
Okay.
I'm saying that, but there have been, I had somebody tell me the other day, and I've never heard of this, and I've never had it happen to me, but someone said the other day that you have to recapture the depreciation in a 1031, and I don't believe that's the case.
That's not accurate at all. I've done
Yeah,
over 100 1031 exchanges and
Yeah.
I've never had to recapture a
and
squat.
you don't have to recapture anything, you don't have to recognize any gain.
As long as you're buying more. doesn't-
Like kind.
Yeah,
Well, it
lifetime,
has to be of greater or equal value.
equal or greater value on a
It can be more than one
1031.
property too, it doesn't have to be just one.
Yeah,
So if you
exactly.
continue to 1031, the recapture is only figured on the last property that you buy?
And your profits are paid on a step-up basis for your kids or for whoever you,
Yeah.
whoever inherits from you. It's a lower tax base.
Yeah, so, did you get what he just said there? What he said was, if you keep that property and then you will it to your children, okay, the children can go in to the IRS and get what's called a stepped-up basis, and that means the adjusted basis in the property isn't what you came out of it and what you had. It's a new basis for them. And guess what happens? They get to start depreciating it all over again.
That's correct.
I've had properties that I've held long enough that I've depreciated twice. So it's pretty cool if you can get a stepped up basis.
So if you were to have a property that was worth $1 million that you had, let's say, depreciation that you were going to, so the recaptured depreciation of, let's say, $100,000,
Yeah.
just for numbers.
Yeah,
If you were to 1031 that $1 million property into a property that was worth $1,100,000
Right.
and then immediately sell it, you'd be better off doing that and paying the 6% realtor commissions
No.
than paying the 25%.
you still have to recapture the tax anytime you sell.
Okay, so
Recapture
the-
the appreciation.
The recapture does move to the second property
It
when you
does.
1031.
It follows
But you're
you.
saying no.
No, I'm saying that it's an inherent, I use it as, and my partners use it as leverageability for inheritance
Yeah.
of these properties.
Yeah.
For the people that are gonna come after us,
He's
that
not
we give
selling
our
it.
stuff.
Yeah,
That's my son.
You sell your property.
yeah,
If you don't sell it, you're okay.
Yeah.
And you can
Just
still
keep
use those
1031.
properties, those profits to take advantage of, and plus you can also pull out a percentage of it, it's called the boot, and you pay a lower tax rate on it, and you can use that for dividend distributions for your
Yeah.
partners.
yeah.
So that's how you can do passive cash flow inside of 1031 exchanges.
You should have taught this class.
Not this one, but yeah.
That was good though.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Well, I was just feeding off of what you said, Ken.
Yeah, good job. So, any other questions? Is that clear as mud? So,
Could you give us your website one more time?
yes. So, I hope this has been helpful. We done?
I think so.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ken.
Appreciate